by the way, just to let you know.
Yeah, I just started.
Just a few
Yeah.
things to, I guess, I don't know, like, what are they called? Icebreakers. So I guess you're a Christian, right?
Yes.
All right, cool. How long have you been doing YouTube? Just curious.
Well, as a personal brand influencer, whatever word you like to use or phrase, like 2 or 3 years, but it's split amongst multiple channels. I would wager you found me based on my newer channel, where I do like debate breakdowns and some other stuff as well. So I've been doing it for a little bit. I've seen, as far as debating, so I've been learning about this stuff for a while as well.
Sick, sick, sick. Yeah. For me, I don't know. I have my channel. I created it like at the beginning of the year or something, or a little bit before that, and then I made content for a little while. And then I had to go back to work, do some stuff, and I kind of just lost motivation, and I was kind of getting bored with my content, so I just kind of took a long break. But here's the thing. Here's the thing about being a philosopher and loving philosophy. You just can't get away from it. You can't do it.
It's
It always
true.
pulls you back.
Yeah.
And during your free time, you're just like looking into philosophy and stuff, and then eventually you just kind of want to go back into it.
Right. Well, as far as moral realism, I feel like that's one of the big things that came up at the start. So I'm a moral realist. I'm also a cognitivist, as opposed to your position, obviously. So my justification for it would be that the Christian worldview is the only way you can ground any worldview logically, epistemically. So questions about metaethics and morality, I feel like presuppose logic, which requires grounding of logic. And I would say the Christian worldview is the only way you can ground logic. And a part of the Christian worldview is moral realism.
Yeah, I was looking up presuppositionalism before we got into this, and I do find it interesting. I don't think it's a good argument. I think there's lots of better arguments for God,
On
like the
what
first mover
basis?
argument, but
On what basis?
what, presuppositionalism?
Well, you said that, for instance, I'm kind of demonstrating the point of presuppositionalism. And the first mover argument, I don't think is a very good one. I think Aquinas' epistemic system is really bad, but because he got it from Aristotle, and Aristotle's problem is that he put metaphysics before epistemology, and I would say that's a problem because it gets knocked down by Humean skepticism. But to demonstrate the point I kind of made with presuppositionalism, you said that you think the first mover argument is better than presuppositionalism. Why?
All right, well, sure. So, which argument do you want to get into first, I guess?
Whichever argument you think is better than presuppositionalism, go ahead.
All right, I'll go on the offense. How about we talk about presuppositionalism? First, I guess let's talk about what it is. Um, Sorry, just give me 1 second to pull up my notes. And while I'm pulling it up, actually, why don't you tell me your position, what presuppositionalism, or more specifically, TAG, the TAG argument,
Right, a
right?
transcendental argument is basically just saying that God is a necessary precondition to epistemically justify any claim at all. So, for example, if someone says, well, I think God doesn't exist, that person's trying to use logic to disprove God. But the question is, okay, the person's assuming logic. What is the justification for logic? And I would find that any worldview aside from Christianity can't give a coherent account for it. As far as a justification for that in and of itself, because on the surface it seems like a circular argument. First, I would say that our system's different from, like, actually Aquinas. So use Aquinas as an example to show you that even within the Christian circle, there's variance on this. So Aquinas believes in classical foundationalism, in that there's just some common sense truth that we all ought to believe, I suppose. Like, a half is less than a whole. It's just common sense, right? And I can give a critique of that if you want. I'm not sure if that's your position, so I don't want to spend too much time going over things that aren't necessarily relevant to our positions. But we would say that there's a level of circularity that is inherent in any worldview anyone has. So, for instance, why is logic true? Well, you have to use logic to try and prove
Mhm.
logic. That's circular to some degree. So we would say that not only circularity allowed to a certain degree when you get to like meta level questions, but also as far as a justification of transcendental argument, it's internal coherence and retorsion in Aristotelian terms, or reductio ad absurdum arguments on other worldviews, showing how they are logically incoherent, whether it be Islam, atheism, Judaism, so on and so forth. So I would say that's the crux of transcendental argument. Depending on, because the argument can be modified to fit anyone else's worldview. So I'll say that's one of the real powers of the argument, and that would also require you to kind of explicate further, how do you try and ground certain things. So I'm not, just attacking straw men.
Okay. No, that's cool. That actually clears it up for me. I mean, I have the argument in front of me, but I like what you said, and I kind of want to talk about that first thing, which you said there's a circularity to logic. You can tell me, that when to stop or when I'm starting to say something you disagree with, but I think that many people have a fundamental misunderstanding of what logic is. For example, I think some people believe that logic is 100% true, and this is not what logic is. What logic is something that's a system that is indispensable for thought and reason. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but I would disagree on, I guess it would kind of be an equivocation on the word logic. I would agree that logic, in one sense, can mean systems of thinking. So, for example, let's say someone says something dumb, and it's like, what logic are you using? It's not necessarily that they're not using logic. Everyone uses some sort of logic, but that's referring to logic as in terms of axioms of thinking. But in another term, I would say that logic is identical to truth in some sense. So I guess it would depend on how you mean the word logic.
Okay. So I would actually disagree with you on that. And I think this is why some people, yeah, what I'll say is this. Logic isn't 100% certain. The thing about logic is you can reject it technically. You can say, I reject logic. And the thing is, you can just stop there and you can just stop thinking until you start thinking again, obviously. But for the context of a debate, you can just say, I reject logic, and then the debate's over, right? Because you can't have a debate without logic.
It's true.
So this is where the important term indispensability comes in. And it's actually a massive realization I had a few months, maybe like a few years ago, is that logic isn't 100% certain. It's indispensable.
Okay, now
so it's not as if
I'll have a question about that right now. So is
Okay.
it certain that logic is not certain?
Is it certain that logic is not certain?
Is that the case?
That's I'd have to like put in a syllogism and look at it. If I say no, are you saying that I'm referring to objectivity? I'm accepting objectivity. Is that what you're saying?
So, well, I'm saying that it's kind of it's a statement that it's a bit like, for example, let's say an empiricist. An empiricist says that only what has empirical evidence should be believed. But the question from there is, well, is there empirical evidence that you should only believe in things that have empirical evidence? So the point is, it's a bit of a self-defeating claim. If you say that it is certain that logic is uncertain, you've kind of defeated the whole point of the statement.
Oh, okay. Well, then I would just take an agnostic approach to it, which is the more accurate approach. I'm agnostic to whether logic. So when I say we can't be certain, you're taking an agnostic view. Or are you saying that when I say I'm not certain, that has to be truth apt? It has to be true or false? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think I don't see how a neutralist position would work for that, because you're using logic to try and assert a neutralist position, but that doesn't really, if you're neutralist about logic, then how could you get to the conclusion that you are a neutralist without presupposing truth and logic?
Well, you do have to presuppose them, but you can't be certain about them because they're indispensable.
Okay, just continue. Let's flesh it
Right.
out.
So this is the way I view logic. When you enter into logic, when you say I'm going to use logic, when you say I accept the laws of logic, you are entering into, like, for purposes of an analogy, you're entering into a game, okay? And you play this game called life. And the game of life has rules, and the rules of the game of life are logic. This is how we rationalize things, reason. This is how we understand deductive and inductive reasoning. Now, we can always go back to the ultimate skeptic position of we can't know anything for certain, and that kind of begs the question if it's self-defeating or not. But you can always reject logic and you can go back to first base and never move ahead. But when you are moving forward, when you speak, when you think, when you act, you are engaging in logic. You must, because logic is a prerequisite for doing these things. But logic is indispensable. We can't technically prove that it's true because, like you said, it's circular. So we can't prove that it's true. But if we don't accept logic, we can't move forward.
Right.
Okay, so that's the way I look at logic, and that's technically the right way to look at logic. It's not that it's 100% certain, like we have the ultimate justification, as you would say, the transcendental justification. You know, the God is the transcendental justification for logic. I wouldn't say that we can know that logic is true, only that we must accept it in order to move forward.
Okay, I see what you're saying, and I guess this would be the divergence. So this would be a question about epistemology. So one thing we also say is that the three primary branches of philosophy, ethics, epistemology, metaphysics, when you see one, you see the other, right? So you can't have a metaethical claim without having some sort of epistemology or metaphysic, and so on and so forth with the other ones. So to that, we would say that, well, truth is an epistemic claim, and truth is rooted in God, and logic is a part of God's nature. So logic is true. Now, from your position, I assume you don't have, I haven't really said it, you said you weren't an atheist earlier, so I guess that would have to be fleshed out a bit more, but I guess from the atheist perspective, we would say that they can't justify logic. So ontologically, they can use logic and come to proper conclusions, but epistemically, they can't justify it, which we would argue makes the whole system fall apart on itself, because it can't justify anything.
So here's what I would say for the atheist position, because, you know, for, like, despite whatever my position is, I'm essentially arguing the secularist, or no, more accurately, the agnostic belief. That's sort of what I'm arguing for. Technically, you don't need justification for logic if you're using it as indispensable, right?
You can say that you don't need logic, but again, it kind of goes back to the thing where it's like you don't need to justify logic, but you're using logic to try and say that you don't have to justify logic. So, like, for example, is it justified that you don't have to justify logic?
Is it justified that you don't have to justify the logic?
Yeah, because you're saying in this scenario, that's the case.
That's too many number symbols for me, bro. I can't think that deep.
Well, the whole point of transcendental argument is in the third order of imposition. So these are the type of questions we'd be interested in asking, and this is where we say God lies. So we would reject the Aquinas first mover type of arguments, because what they do is they presuppose kind of like classical foundationalism. There's common sense and there's truth in some way without God, but ontologically they say there is no truth without God, but epistemically they say there isn't. So it doesn't make much sense. But yeah, we would be working on a third order of imposition. That's the whole point of the transcendental argument.
Okay. So I think that was pretty good. I'm gonna go through the syllogistical structure of the transcendental argument, and I'm gonna tell you where my disagreements are. Okay.
Okay.
So premise one: logic, morality, and knowledge are real, universal, and necessary. Do you like that premise?
Yes.
Okay. Premise two: these things require a transcendental foundation.
Yeah.
Okay. Premise three: only the Christian worldview can provide that foundation.
Yes.
Premise four: therefore, the Christian God must exist.
Yeah, but I feel like there would need to be more clarification, because the way we justify that is by showing the internal coherence of the Christian worldview and then reductio on the other positions. So I guess as a matter, like a state of affairs, that's true, but it has to be
Process of
fleshed out
elimination,
more.
basically.
If you will. Yeah, it's called
Process of
retorsion.
elimination.
Yeah, you could call it that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So here's where I disagree with premise one. And premise one is logic, morality, knowledge are real, universal, and necessary. I would say that there are presuppositions baked into a few of these. Now, what I will say is logic, you cannot deny. You just can't deny it, okay? It's undeniable. You need logic to move forward. Knowledge, I would say is questionable because I guess it depends on what you mean by it's real, universal, and necessary.
Well,
Like
well,
as you said before, there's a circularity to things. So how can we know knowledge is real? Unless you make an argument like I am I what how does it go?
I
I
think
think
therefore
therefore
I
I
am.
am.
Yeah,
In which
no,
that
yeah,
case,
yeah.
then
So
that could make a case for how knowledge is
yeah,
true.
yeah. So that's classical foundationalism. That's Descartes. We reject that. But as far as knowledge, we would say knowledge is grounded in God, and that's what epistemically justifies. And now, as far as not, this kind of goes back to what I was saying about uh, everything being intertwined. So knowledge, justification knowledge is epistemology, but knowledge claims itself as ontology, which is in the realm of metaphysics. It's talking about the existence of things. We would say that the only way you could have logic, which you said was necessary, is if you have knowledge in order to instantiate the logic. You can't have logic without some form of knowledge. So if logic's necessary, then knowledge is necessary.
You can't have logic without knowledge.
No, because there has to be, like for example, a logical axiom
You think
requires
logic is independent from humanity?
independent of what?
Humanity? So like if you die, does logic still exist?
Yes, it's grounded in God.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so all right, so let's just say that I accept logic and knowledge. I would still reject morality on the basis that I don't think it's been proven since it's in the premise. Right? So like the premise is that logic, morality, and knowledge are really universal and necessary. I would say that this is an assertion and I accept logic and knowledge, but I don't see the evidence for morality. And I guess
Right.
this kind of devolves into the meta ethical debate of how do you prove moral realism. And you would say you use God, but I think the problem there is you can tell me if I'm wrong. Can you use another argument besides the transcendental argument for your moral realism position? Since that's the argument in question.
Well, okay, so two things. One, I would say that I'll go back to the thing where things are intertwined. So logic requires some sort of ethic. Okay, so if knowledge, let's say logic more specifically because it's more explicit. Let's say logic is necessary. Okay, logic requires some sort of instantiation of, like, let's say it's premise one, premise two, premise three. It's logically coherent. Okay, from there, it's already baked in and assumed that you should, that's ethical, that's moral, you should follow the conclusion. If you don't, then logic becomes meaningless. So I can say that's one way it's intertwined. Now, two, the thing is, when you ask, is there an argument that, aside from transcendental argument, that could justify moral realism, I could try to make some kind of normative argument, but the whole point of the transcendental argument is to show that any argument or position is subject to the Christian worldview. So it would be wrong-headed for me to do that, because that kind of defeats the whole purpose of the argument.
Okay. So I guess if we just accept the first part, such as logic and knowledge, we can move on to premise two. And my main problem with this premise is that I don't see the evidence for it. So the premise is these things require a transcendental foundation, and from what I can tell, that is an assertion. And I'm just curious, without using this argument, how do you evidence this assertion?
Well, like I said, it's wrong-headed to do that, because the whole point of the argument is to show that this is the only way you could do things. Now, I feel like that's fleshed out more in premise three, right? But as far as answering this statement, I'll give a justification for it and explain it more, so maybe it makes a bit more sense. So premise two would be, this requires a transcendental foundation. Okay, so when we say morality, we mean objective morality. And the problem with, let's say, not having a transcendental basis is there's no way to ground it beyond human autonomy. So that would be the justification for morality, because morality is meant as an objective morality. Let's say logic. Logic is kind of like a rule. It's like rules to follow when you're reasoning, thinking, and axioms and whatnot. That's what it's meant by logic. And again, just like morality, to escape human autonomy, which makes it subjective and each person can determine whatever they would like, God is used as transcendental. Knowledge, how can we know something is true? That's like a knowledge claim. Epistemology, because this is an epistemic argument, not an ontological argument. That's very important. Epistemically, the only way to justify knowledge is via transcendental source because, again, you escape human autonomy. Now, there's other things like consciousness, so many other things. Any transcendental category applies to this argument, which these are things you need to presuppose in order to argue against it, which is the whole point of the argument. It's a third order imposition, meta level argument. It's not like a normative argument where, like, I say, you know what, there's milk in the fridge, and the way I'm going to prove it is by going to the fridge and getting the milk. It's not the type of argument this is.
Okay, interesting. I don't know. I think it's interesting. So I don't know. It's interesting. I don't see the evidence for, like the transcendental foundation. I wonder if I could even grant that to you. I mean, I know you don't like the first mover argument, but I mean, we can go to that in a second. I can show you why that's true. But if I granted that to you, would that work? So if I said the transcendental foundation was the first mover, only the Christian worldview can provide that. Would premise 3 even be the conclusion to that?
Well,
because you would have to make the connection from the first mover to the Christian worldview, right?
Exactly. That's why Aquinas' argument doesn't work. That's exactly why.
First mover.
That is exactly why we don't like Aquinas' argument, because you gave a great criticism of it. You only get like this deist concept of God. You don't get to Christianity from there. It's a good point.
Interesting. I see why you don't like it, but that doesn't mean it's not true. I mean, we'll talk about that in a sec. I don't know. I mean, is there anything else you want to talk about in the transcendental argument for God?
Yeah.
I reject the idea of morality existing, and then I also reject the idea that we need a transcendental foundation. I just don't see a good deductive evidence for those things.
Right, and the argument I would make from there is, how do you determine what's good evidence or bad evidence? And we'll get to that, but I want to, as far as the transcendental argument, I want to go over premise 3 more, because I feel like that's kind of in question. So, for example, atheism. Atheism asserts that, well, it depends on, because it could be atheism, as in no theism, or literally, or without theism, or no theism, right? But the whole point would be that in order to make their logical assertion that God doesn't exist, or they make arguments against God, or they don't accept the Christian worldview, they're still using logic, they're using morality, they're using all these different things without epistemic justification. Islam has a logically incoherent concept of God. You're not a Muslim, so I assume I mean, if you want for me to unpack that so it makes more sense, I want to do that, but you're not a Muslim, obviously, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. Same with Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc. And then from there we say only the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, the Christian worldview, can ground these transcendentals which are being spoken of in the argument and are necessary preconditions for any worldview, even if the worldview rejects it, because in rejecting it, it still uses it.
Okay. I'll let that be. If I can have one last word on this, and I don't mean to be redundant, but again, I can't see. I see premise 1 as presupposing morality, and I'll just grant knowledge. I'll say logic and knowledge are definitely real, universal, and necessary. I still think you're presupposing morality, and for premise 2, I just don't think you have any evidence for transcendental foundation. That's all I'll say in the matter. We can keep talking about it if you want. We don't have to. We can move on to something else.
Well, I guess the argument I would make is that, okay, you're saying that, okay, this logically does not make sense. Why not?
Yes.
Well, how do you ground logic? You're using logic.
So you ground logic in its indispensability, like we spoke about before. It's not 100% certain. You need it to move forward. So all things that we comprehend must be logical. They must be. Otherwise, we can only understand things through logical lenses.
And how do you know that? How do you know that?
Because of its indispensability.
And how do
we don't know it for certain. We don't know it for certain.
How do you know it's indispensable?
Because if I don't accept that existence exists, we cannot talk.
And what's wrong with that?
Nothing. Nothing's wrong with that. We could not talk. We could do that.
Right, but we're talking about worldviews, not necessarily just us talking to each other. So within your worldview, what's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with that in my worldview.
So why do you accept it?
That's a different discussion. That's a different discussion.
Well,
And I'd be willing to have that one with you.
I feel like it has everything to do with it
Um,
because I feel like we're kind of getting into ethical territory.
I agree with you, and I will say the question of oughts, epistemic oughts, moral oughts, is a massive conversation. One that I've had with, I don't know if you've ever heard of Liquid Zulu, but I've had a massive conversation about epistemic oughts and what that means, and that's a tough one to talk about for sure.
Well, I would
But
say it's
ultimately,
tough for
I
you
can't.
because you don't have the Christian worldview, and you can't because to have this epistemology you're saying, you need to assume some sort of ought, but you said that morality isn't real.
Well, well, first of all, you don't know if I have the Christian worldview. But second of all, if I
Well,
did have
I
the
assume
Christian
you don't.
worldview, that would be inductively used, not deductively. Does that make sense?
Well, we would argue the only way
I,
you can know the distinction between inductive and deductive is with the Christian worldview epistemically.
right. So, like, I could have the Christian worldview, and that would be my reason for having this conversation with you. But that would be an inductive argument, not a deductive argument. That would be because of
Well,
faith, not because of 100% logic.
no. So that's kind of confusing orders of imposition. We would say the only way you can know if something is logical or is inductive or deductive is with the Christian worldview. You have to presuppose the Christian worldview to even ask that question.
Yeah, but you're presupposing that, and I don't accept that presupposition.
Right, and the whole point of the argument is to explain how. And right now I'm showing that you're making logical assertions without any epistemic force. That's the argument I'm making right now.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Um, Wait, did you want me to respond to anything, or
Well,
I
yeah,
feel
because
like
I
we
feel like
closed
that
that
kind
pretty
of undercuts the whole entire worldview. I feel like that's the main point I'm making.
Wait, so you want me to respond to the oughts? Why ought you do anything epistemically?
Yeah, because I feel like that's a necessary condition of having any type of worldview.
Okay, let me see. Um, I guess I could do this kind of off the cuff. I wasn't expecting to get into this, but maybe we can build it from the ground up. Okay, so the way I see it, because we're getting into my position of beliefs. Um, I had this debate with Zulu, and we talked about why you ought to do anything. I asked him the question, why ought you do anything? Because I don't know the answer, why ought you do anything? And I looked into this like thoroughly, like the deductive cases for why you ought to do anything, and I couldn't find any deductive reasons. And that was a big problem for me because I'm like, oh shit, like how can I deductively prove
Yeah.
that I ought to do something? And this is the answer. And you can accept it or you don't. You can't deductively prove, unless you're a presuppositionalist, which I don't agree with. You can't deductively prove on logic alone that you ought to do anything. Now, there's been cases made. There's things like shit. I forget what the argument's called. But people say, well, then like there's like an epistemic ought that you have. Like, shouldn't you or ought you seek higher knowledge? Ought you live a good life? Ought you blah 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 blah? Still, deductively, I couldn't find anything on this, and that's just what I found.
Right. So, is it deductive that you can't deductively ground this?
Yes, because I use the deductive system to search for answers for it.
So you
Like I use
assume.
the deductive process.
Okay. I'll say this again just to be clear, because I just want to like make sure. So you're saying that you're using deduction to disprove that deduction is possible?
No.
Okay.
I must have misheard you. I couldn't find a deductive case why you ought act.
Right, and your conclusion is at the end of all of it.
I'm agnostic. That's my conclusion. I don't know the answer.
Okay.
Deductively. Now, there's inductive cases, and those are different. But deductively speaking, I can't find why we ought act. And I
Well,
don't think there is an answer to that.
well, I see. I would disagree with the distinction in deductive and inductive because the whole point is that deductive and inductive are both pulling from reasoning, right? And my argument is that you can't reason without the Christian worldview. You can do it ontologically, but not epistemically, which is required for your worldview. So I feel like you kind of have the same problem. Like, how do you ground being able to reason deductively or inductively at all?
Well, I guess this goes back to like the indispensability of logic. Technically, you can't ground it, right?
Okay, so it's like a brute fact.
What's a brute fact?
A brute fact is basically something that's just true. It's just true.
No, no, I mean, like, what is the brute fact
The brute fact would be
you're
that
ascribing to?
logic is indispensable. You just need logic.
Okay, so you're saying that's a brute fact.
I'm asking if that's what you're saying.
No, because I would say that facts are indispensable as well.
So, okay, it's a brute fact that facts are indispensable.
I guess because wait, doesn't logic precede facts?
That's a good question. I would say that
I think it
they
does, right? I think it does.
I would say that I would say it's kind of like ethics, epistemology, and metaphysics. I feel like they kind of, when you see one, you see the other. They're kind of, it's very hard to put one logically prior to the other, but I think truth presupposes fact. Truth presupposes logic. I think that's because epistemology. Yeah.
Presupposes. Okay, interesting. So I mean, I guess that calls into question the objectivist argument or the idea of objectivism. We know objectivism is true because to deny it reinforces it. So if you say objectivism isn't true, is that true? And you go into infinite regress, and we know infinite regress doesn't exist, so objectivism has to be true. So facts do exist. Reality does exist. There is a truth. Truth exists, and that's undeniable because to deny it would be to reinforce it.
Right. So we would ask how you know, and then you say, well, to deny it would be this, and we would say, what's wrong with denying it? Because you're kind of assuming that you can't deny it in that argument. That's the whole point of like the case you're making.
I guess this goes into the, well, would you accept the laws of logic? Because every proposition must either be true or false, and there is no in between. So
Yeah.
would you accept that, or would you presuppose that with the transcendentalism for the proposition? So if I said one of those, it either had to be true or false, would you give me another answer?
I would say that, yeah, I would agree.
Agree with what? The laws of logic?
Yeah, I agree with the laws of logic on the basis that it's grounded in God, which is the very foundation of all knowledge claims, logic, etc.
That's not agreeing with me, bro.
Yeah,
That's not agreeing with me.
Well, yeah, I don't think that laws of logic are independent of God.
I know, but but like what I'm asking you is, for the proposition, is objectivity false? That would either have to have a true or false to it, right? There couldn't be anything else.
Oh, yeah, okay. I think I didn't hear you
Okay.
for that part, yeah.
Okay, yeah, well, there you go. So, like, according to laws of logic, that proposition would either have to be true or false. And if you say false, you reinforce it. If it's true, then you reinforce it. So it's going to be true every single time. And so that's how you get objectivity. Now, here's the interesting thing. All logical axioms, there's not actually like a hierarchy to them. They kind of build like a framework, like a rule framework. So like the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, the law of the excluded middle, it's not like the law of identity is greater than them. It's like they're all co-equal to each other. And it's the same thing with the primacy of existence, the primacy of consciousness. They're all co-equal axioms that kind of, like I think you said earlier with your presuppositionalism, metaethics, metaphysics, and whatever the other one was, they all kind of are co-equal with each other. They're necessary components to each other. I would say that's also true with logical axioms. But yeah, that being said, you asked me about where I get like if I reject deductive oughtness or whatever, and I forget how we got there. basically how I would build it out is logic is indispensable. So that's not 100% certain, but it means we must use it to move forward. And then building a case from, if we skip down all the way to human action and we accept the axioms, humans act, you cannot from that point on build a deductive case for why ought humans act. And this is what we call the is-ought problem.
Yeah, yeah. And
whether it's ethical or epistemic, you can't prove the ought from the is. And that's such a widely pervasive discussion in this philosophical sphere. It's like,
yeah.
And that's what I tracked it back. It actually goes to epistemic oughts. Like, why ought we, know what's true? Why ought we know what's true? And the truth is you can't. You can't deductively prove why you ought to seek truth. Even though we do seek truth, we can't deductively prove why we ought to seek truth.
Yeah, I think that's a great argument against
my
atheists.
Position on the matter.
I think that's
my position on the matter.
I think that's a great argument against most atheists who try inserting some type of morality based on his statements, which is most atheists. But as far as what you said, I feel like there was something there that's very important. So at some point you said, we must do this or must accept this in order to continue. Why? Why must we? I guess on your worldview.
Humans act. So, for example, we don't know if humans exist, but we kind of act as though they do. So, in the sense that we debate about humans, we both performatively agree that humans exist if we talk about humans. Does that make sense?
Right, but that wouldn't epistemically justify whether or not humans exist. You just act as if humans exist.
Correct.
Right, correct. But the question I'm asking is about epistemology, because epistemology is justification. If you can't justify your worldview, then it doesn't make much sense.
Bro, I think you nailed it at the beginning of the conversation where you said this was going to be the big divide. I think what you said is true. You can't justify anything deductively. There's no 100% justification for anything. There is only indispensability.
Okay. Right, but then when you say this is kind of like what
with you, basically.
Yeah, it's kind of like I think Matt Dillahunty kind of used this in his debate with Jay Dyer, and I would say the problem with it is that you're saying that essentially there's no justification for it, but you're asking me to justify my worldview, for instance. So why can't I just say, well, my worldview is it doesn't need justification, it just is.
Okay, let's make a distinction here. 100% certain justification, indispensable justification. When I ask you to justify your worldview, I'm asking for an indispensable justification.
Okay, well, why does this distinction matter at all? On your worldview, at least.
This distinction matters because I think the way you see justification is something that is 100% certain proves it, right? It's completely certain.
Yeah, it's certain and as far as the top, like logic and all this stuff, it's 100% certain that this is true.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The way you are looking, the prism from which you are looking at this is that there are things that can I even say that? There are things that we know are absolutely certain. Or there are things that are, or I don't know if I'm saying this right.
There are things that are certain.
Things that are absolutely certain.
I would agree with that, yeah. Because the contrary is impossible.
The way I'm looking at this is we can't be absolute, like we could be 99.9% certain, but we can't be absolutely certain.
Okay.
And that's the distinction.
All right, and the question would be, how do you ground this distinction? Why?
So grounding the distinction, by grounding the distinction, you mean certain. You must be certain about this. That's what you mean when you say justification. Grounded. That's what you mean.
Yeah.
I'm saying you can't. But the only way to move forward is to play the game. Is to accept the indispensability of the game. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but like I understand you're trying to make a not 100% committal statements because there's a possibility that it could not be true. But I think the problem with that is
Well, can I go a little bit deeper into that?
Go
It's
ahead.
not that it's not that I'm, it's like what you said. It's not that I'm trying to be like intelligently skeptical. All right. It's that I don't know. It's that I can't know.
And how do you know that you can't know?
Because I would have to understand in an ironic way, I would have to like transcendentally have to understand what it means to know something, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's the point of our argument. You need a transcendental source in order to know anything. That's what we say.
But the problem is we can't. We can't know something for certain. Do you
Yeah,
see?
right.
So
But
from my
but
point of view, we can't know something for certain.
right. But I'm asking for justification, and you said you need a transcendental source in order to justify it, which is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And the point is that
Yes,
you're
but
okay. Go ahead.
in order to begin to make any assumptions, in order to be able to think, um, you either have to accept indispensably something, or you have to be 100% confident about knowing something.
I I would actually I think this is the point where it kind of diverges from human consciousness. We would say at this point we're like in deep trenches of metaethical territory. We would say that consciousness and knowledge is rooted in God. So, for example, consciousness, you're making a point about how can we know? You know, we don't know. We aren't transcendental. We aren't infallible, right? And the whole point we make is that we get consciousness from a transcendental source. So we can know because we have this transcendental source. We're connected. We get consciousness from God.
Okay. That no, I understand why you see it that way. I don't. Um. So do you want to move on?
Well, I mean, at a certain point, it seems like the thing is you're trying to say that you can't 100% be certain about something, but at a certain point, you have to be certain of something. Because if you don't, it just keeps going on forever, forever, and forever, and forever.
Yeah. I'm trying to see. So I guess I'll say it again. Like, I can't know anything for certain. I can't even know if there's a transcendent. Because in order for me to assume that there could be a transcendental something, I would have to assume that there's a transcendental something. But I can't know that there's a transcendental
Right,
something.
right. But how
Because
do
I
you,
can't know anything.
right? But how do you know that you can't know? That's the point.
You can't even know that.
Right. So at a certain point,
This
you
is the
can't know anything.
circularity you're talking.
At a certain point, you can't know
Yeah,
anything.
exactly. But the thing is, I act as though I do. And the reason I do is because I'm playing the game. I'm accepting the rules and I'm moving forward, even though I'm showing epistemic humility in that I can't possibly know. Like you said, it's circular. At the very, very bottom level, I can't possibly know something for certain.
Right, but that undercuts your whole entire worldview because, as far as I understand, you like to have discussions with people. And I assume that means because you think you're saying something that's true. But truth is within epistemology, and you essentially just said you can't know anything. So it kind of defeats
Yeah,
the
well,
whole.
it depends on what you mean by truth. Because like now that I've reframed this whole understanding of logic, um, everything everything that is logical is indispensable. So even truth is indispensable. That doesn't mean truth is 100% true. It means that truth is indispensable.
Right, but again, the problem is that when I ask, well, how do you know truth is indispensable, which is a part of justification, it kind of goes back to this infinite regress thing where you can't really know anything. So even these claims you're making right now in order to try and get out of the box are subject, you're still in the box. That's the point I'm making.
Yeah, no, I know you're what you're saying is correct. You're saying that I am in a circle, technically speaking, and I can't justify my way out of it because you can't 100% justify anything. That's my point. You can't 100% justify anything.
And we
And
would
your argument would be that it's God. God is your 100% justification, or God is what allows you to justify something. But
Right.
from a consciousness worldview, you start at consciousness, and from consciousness you see a few things. You see existence, you see identity, you see non-contradiction. There's a lens at which humans have perception. We start at consciousness, but consciousness isn't where it begins. It's where we begin. It's where we perceive things, and then we perceive the world outside of us.
Right. Okay.
And fuck, I totally lost where I was going with this.
Okay. No. No.
Maybe did it.
No. I feel like this is actually very important because now, like, you actually define like a epistemic worldview, right? So my epistemic worldview has to do with God. There's classical foundationalism, which says there's just truths. There's empiricism, which says only believe what you can empirically verify. And it's a bit similar to your position in that saying if we start from consciousness worldview, okay, that would be, assuming you believe that, that would be your worldview. That would be your epistemic starting point, consciousness. And from there, it would be a question of, well, how do you know that that's the actual starting point?
It's not the actual starting point. It's a human starting point because it's how we view things.
Is there anything beyond humanity? Or are you saying that each person's limited to their own sense experience and they can't know anything outside of that?
Well, I'm saying that epistemically we start with our experience. So that's where we start, and then we kind of have to build the world out from that point on. So you start with I think, therefore I am, and then you build existence exists, identity exists, non-contradiction exists.
Right. So these are essentially I think, therefore I am. This is presupposed. The problem with I think, therefore I am is that's a metaphysical statement without epistemic justification. It's like putting the metaphysical cart before the epistemic horse. That's what we would say. There's no justification for I think, therefore I am.
It's undeniable, right? Would you say it's undeniable or no? Would you say it's deniable?
I would say that, like, obviously I believe that, but epistemically, like under like human skepticism, it's in question.
Actually, you know what? This is interesting. From an ultimate skeptic perspective, there are even some axioms that are more than indispensable, right? For example, existence exists is more than indispensable. Would you say it's true? Like it can't not be true?
Yeah, but I feel like I want to make an important clarification here. So the point is that, so David Hume would make the type of arguments I'm making right now about knowledge, how you like can't really know anything. Like that's what I'm demonstrating here. And the point is that skepticism has its own problems. Like just being a hyper skeptic like Hume, that comes with problems. And what we're saying is that the problems are only solved by the Christian worldview. That's what we would say. So I would agree, like existence is true. Like ontologically, I agree with that, but epistemically, the way we're getting there is different, which is the transcendental argument is an epistemic argument.
Okay. I would agree with that. I would agree that it is an epistemic argument. Okay, but we have been talking about this for a while, so I do want to move on just because this is a cool conversation, but I do want to get to some other arguments.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I guess the first mover argument. So I'm curious how you're going to get out of this one. Okay. So let me read this one out for you, and you can tell me what you think. All right, this one actually might be debatable, so I'm curious. Premise one: logic is contingent. Oh, sorry. I should probably lay the groundwork so that we understand what we're talking about. I'm going to get a little bit, not a lot, just a tiny bit into modalism. Okay.
Okay.
So, like metaphysical speaking, I'm going to talk about necessary. I'm going to talk about contingent. All I mean by these things is that something that is necessary is something that is how can I say this without sounding like a fucking nerd? It's self-evident in the way you hate me saying it's self-evident. It's undeniable. It couldn't be. It's axiomatic. Do you know what I mean by necessary?
Yeah, I understand what you mean by necessary, and I know you haven't made the argument yet, and I'm not gonna like stop you from doing it, but that would be the first major point of disagreement. And there's a specific argument I have against self-evident truths, so we can get into that later.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, how about I start with premise 2? God is necessary.
I agree. Ontologically, I agree, but knowing this is the first mover argument, I think epistemically I would disagree with how they get to that conclusion.
Wait, don't be bad faith, bro. Let me lay out the premises, and then we'll see if you agree or not.
Like ontologically,
All right, so
I
you
agree.
agree with premise 2.
Ontologically,
Okay,
yes.
all right. I don't know what that means, but we'll get into that. Okay, premise 1: logic is contingent.
No.
Because you would. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I thought you might say something like that. So logic is necessary.
Yeah, because it's a part of God's nature, and God's nature is necessary.
Okay, I thought you might. I should have brought out my notes for this. I should have known you were gonna do. Wait, let me. Okay. Logic. You would say logic is God, right? Or logic is part of God or something?
No, not part, and is God in terms, because I believe in essence energy distinction, so I believe that logic is an energy that comes from God, which is a reflection of the essence. I feel like it's kind of independent of this debate, because like it means the same thing within the context of this debate. That would more so be an argument against Catholic and Orthodox, but yeah, is proper. Assuming is picks out an energy instead of the essence, yeah.
Okay. So you disagree that logic is contingent?
I disagree, yes.
You think that? Yeah, okay. All right. Let me see if I can big brain my way into this. Would you say logic depends? Logic is a system that depends on rules, structure, distinction, sequence, all things that imply a cause.
Yeah.
Would you say okay? Would you say logic? Logic is affected by cause.
No. No, I wouldn't say that. Affected or
Because if you did, I could have got you real good, bro. If you say I could have. No, I'm just kidding. I'm messing with you. Okay. I don't know where my notes are exactly for this. Let me see if I can find it. But the way I understand this is you accept the law of causality, right? All effects have a cause.
yeah, ontologically, yes. I feel like epistemical disagree, but yes. Yeah.
Is that because you would use presuppositionalism in epistemology?
Yeah. So I guess just to like flesh out the ontology versus epistemology thing, like 2 + 2 = 4. Like even us, like we'll agree 2 + 2 = 4. That's an ontological statement of existence. We agree on that. But the justification is, well, I feel like God has something to do intrinsically with mathematics. I'm assuming, I don't know if you believe that, but let's say you didn't for the sake of example. Epistemically, justification-wise, we would disagree, but ontologically, we agree. So that's why I keep making the distinction, because I feel like I don't fully agree, but I agree with a part of it. Like just the statement of itself, yeah.
Okay. All right. Now here's what I'm interested in. So, oh god, this is so weird. So the big problem with the problem of evil, and this is how you guys get around it. The problem with the problem of evil is it kind of delegitimizes God in a logical sense if we use the problem of evil, because he cannot be all powerful, all knowing, and all good, and then therefore not create a world that is perfect and no suffering, because it would be illogical for him not to do that. But you would say that because God is logical. Actually, no, I'll let you answer.
Right, the answer would be
God is
that,
all powerful, he's all knowing, and he's all good. Why doesn't he create a perfect world without suffering?
well, I would first say that your argument presupposes things that you can't justify, which we kind of already went over. I don't want to just beat a dead horse, but again, the transcendental argument prevails through everything I say, so I'm going to keep going back to it because that's the whole point of the argument. It's a presupposition of all of the things you could ever think of. So that'll be the first point of the argument, that you can't you can't make the argument without the prerequisites that come with the Christian worldview, but then you're arguing against the Christian worldview using the Christian worldview, which doesn't really make much sense. And as far as the question of whether or not God's qualities would allow him to make a world that isn't quote-unquote perfect, I would say that we can't know that this world is or is not perfect in that sense.
Because God is unknowable. Wait, is
No.
God unknowable?
It depends on what you pick out by God. If you mean essence...
Wait. Humans can understand all things logical. Is God all logical?
Yes, that's an energy that comes down, yeah.
Can we understand God completely?
We can understand him...
Could we possibly or potentially know God fully as humans in our human bodies?
Well, it depends what you pick out by God. If you pick out energies, yes. Essence, not in this life.
What the fuck does that mean?
Well, yeah, so there's going to be a difference between me and, say, Catholics, Western, Protestant, etc. They believe that the essence is identical to all these properties, which is kind of why I brought it up earlier. It's actually relevant now. But that's the problem with Catholicism, Protestantism, in terms of like how they usually view things, and Muslims. Muslims have the same problem, and Jews also have the same problem. They believe that God is just essence, but God's supposed to be transcendent, but you're supposed to know God. It doesn't make any sense. So what the East did, the Orthodox, I'm not necessarily Orthodox, but I agree with this point of theology. The point is that God's essence is unknowable, but the energies that come from the essence are in ways that we can understand them. So we can understand God through analogy. You understand him like, oh, he's like the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. The Father is like the Father we have in real life. Son is kind of like a son in real life. All powerful, we kind of have an understanding of that in our own sense experience, or what power is. We can understand God through analogy, but understanding the essence, we can't. Not in this life, I would say. And I would also say that even in the afterlife, it's a bit murky as to whether or not that can be the case.
Okay, so then can we know God?
Depends what you're picking out by God. We can know God by analogy, through the energies.
Okay, so we can know God analogously. This is weird because if God is, would you say God is, okay, would you say God is higher than logic?
No.
Okay, here we go. So you wouldn't say God is transcending logic. He doesn't transcend logic.
No.
Interesting. Wait. Oh, dude, this is part of my fucking argument. Okay. Oh, wait, it's gonna go in a circle. Holy shit. Okay. So God is not transcending logic.
No.
You would say he is logic or he's part of logic?
Not part is.
He is logic. Okay.
Picking out an energy, yes.
So we can potentially fully understand God. Like there's a world where we fully understand God in our human brains.
No, so
because we can understand all
you're
things
equivocating on the word God.
We can fully understand logic.
Yes.
But God is logic.
In energy, an energy that comes down, yes, not the essence.
And where's the energy come from?
I already said the energy is a reflection of the essence, but they are not the essence.
Is God in a different realm or is he in this realm? Is he logic?
Depends what you mean by realm.
Is he in space? Is he in space?
No, he's not in space. He's not extended in space.
Okay, so is he in a different realm? Is he in a different dimension? He's not in this universe. Would you say he's in this universe?
He's a non-physical entity, so it's kind of the same way you can ask.
Oh no, are you a fucking Platonist, bro?
Don't
say yes.
No,
I
feel like some aspects of our worldview can be similar to Neoplatonism, but we are not Platonists.
Okay, this might unironically and unfortunately get into fucking metaphysics. Would you say that there is something more than the physical world?
Yes, certainly.
Okay, and God, well, I don't want to ask you that because that'll turn us into another conversation. what I want to know is, where is God? You said God is logic. Now, I believe that logic is physically in the universe.
Okay, yeah. So
I don't know
so
if
that's
what
a
you think.
disagreement. I would heavily disagree with that.
Shit. So, are you a Platonist then? You believe that
No,
there's forms and stuff?
no, like I said, we kind of have a. You could say that it's similar to Neoplatonism, but we're not Platonists because Plato believed in a lot of stupid stuff like reincarnation and stuff. So we're not Platonists.
No, I mean, yeah, obviously not. I don't mean like his whole view. I just mean his metaphysical view.
Yeah,
Platonism,
just to be clear, I guess
Platonic realism.
we believe that there's universals. We believe that there's a non-physical world. In terms of forms, I'm not a I'm not a nominalist, so I don't believe in their view of no universals. I believe that there is, let's say, like a universal whiteness that this shirt is appealing to in order for us to think it's white. So
And is the whiteness in the shirt, or is the whiteness in a different realm?
again, realm kind of makes me think that it's like something we can
The realm of
access.
forms. The realm of forms.
I wouldn't necessarily say forms because I feel like it kind of box me into Platonism. I would just say that there's universals. So if you take that to mean forms, then okay, sure.
Okay, but where are the universals? Are they in the physical universe?
They're not extended in space. No.
Where are they?
Well, I just said they're not extended in space. You're asking me where they are. They're not anywhere in terms of extended physical space. They exist as abstract objects without any physical representation. There's things in physical that appeal to them, of course, but in of themselves, they're not physical things.
All right, we just disagree there. Let's go back to God. Where is God?
Well, not extended in space. He took a human incarnate form at one point. He added a human nature onto his divine nature. But as of right now, and he could also enter into creation at certain points in time, but he is not extended in space via his divine nature. Like Go ahead.
He's not in our world physically anywhere, right?
He's not extended in space anywhere.
So where is he?
And you're assuming that he has to have some kind of physical presence. He does take on physical presence, but that's
okay. Well, how do we start with is he? Is he or is he not?
Right now?
Sure.
Well, I'm not sure. I guess there could be like some kind of theophany going on at this very moment, but nothing in this room that I'm in. I'm assuming not in your room. Generally speaking, I would say probably not.
Well, I asked you if God is, not where God is. I want to back up and see if we're on the same page.
Again, if assumes that I know whether or not there's a theophany going on at this very moment, and I don't know that.
Explain theophany. What does that mean?
Theophany is like a physical manifestation of God through an energy. So, for example, an angel like in the Bible says, let's say Gideon saw the face of the Lord. That was a theophany that came down, an angel that Gideon saw, and that's an energy coming down that humans can perceive.
Okay, so you would say God's form is, or a part of God's form is energy?
Not, we don't believe God has parts in any way.
But you said his energy is in the universe.
Yeah, we can perceive them both in non. So, for example, logic is an energy we can perceive. That's a non-physical thing, but it could also be in physical form.
So where's the physical form?
Well, it depends on what exactly you're talking about.
I'm talking about God.
Right. I just mean like if it's like a theophany of an angel, you could see the angel. If there is one right now, which I can't say I know for sure. I would say probably not, but I'm just trying to be clear on what I mean. Because if I could say that there's absolutely no theophany right now, that kind of extends the bounds of my knowledge because I don't have access to universals in that sense. I have access to other universals, but not something like that.
Okay. So, just to kind of go over what we're talking about right now, what we're talking about is I'm trying to know if God has a form in the universe. And the reason I want to know if God has a form in the universe is because I want to see if God is part of logic, is bound by logic. You would say God is logic. And if God is logic, I would say that logic exists and logic does not exist. So logic, oh God, how do I say this? Cannot, how do I say this without double speaking? Logic does not exist in non-existence. Logic exists in existence. Would you say logic, and okay, and the reason I say that is because I would say that the first mover, and I know you wouldn't agree with this, the first mover exists in is in non-existence and existence. But you wouldn't say this. You would say that. Would you say that? You wouldn't say God is in non-existence.
No.
I'm trying to figure out where to go with this. So the reason that this is weird is because I want to get an answer to how God is logic, but also is not in the world. Because logic is in the world, but God is not in the world.
Right. Okay.
Now you would say God is logic and logic is in the world, but it's an energy.
Right. But okay.
But you also said there's not parts of God, so all of God must be in the world because logic is in the world.
No.
Right?
No. So the energies are what's in the world, not the essence. So it depends on what you pick
Is
up.
logic in the world?
Huh?
Is logic in the world?
Yes.
Okay, but God is logic.
In energy, yes, but not essence.
But God's not in parts. He can't.
No.
He can't have part of himself in the world and part of him not in the world.
Right.
But you said his energy's in the world.
Yeah, that's not. We wouldn't say that's a part. Like you can't divide God into different parts. Like when you say the word God,
What?
you have to be specific about what you're using. So energy is a reflection of the essence. It's also a reflection of the Father. It's a reflection of the Holy Spirit. It's a reflection of Jesus, the Son. So it's not.
Would you prefer I said aspect?
Huh?
Would you prefer if I said aspect? An aspect of God is in the world.
Yeah, you can say that.
Okay, I'm kind of getting brain warped trying to figure out.
And as far as logic, just to
but
clear things up, so I feel like you're kind of. It's like your system is being used in my system, so it doesn't make sense because you're saying like logic's in the world, and
that's probably true. I said that's probably true. Continue.
Right, and if logic is in the world, we're not saying that logic is a physical thing. Just because it's in the world, I wouldn't say that means it's physical. It just means that we can access it in some way via knowledge.
Okay. Is logic connected to existence?
Logic's existence requires God. So God is logically prior.
Does logic require existence?
Yeah, in that, well, logic exists, so I guess it requires existence in that sense, yeah.
Okay, now I think we're getting somewhere. So logic requires existence.
Sure.
And now, here's the tough one. Has existence always existed?
God's eternal, so yes.
Okay, so here's where we run into a contradiction, because you accept the law of causality, right? The law of causality rejects infinitism. So there's a contradiction. Because I'll lay it out for you. Logic requires existence. Existence requires the law of causality. The law of causality said that infinity is false. Existence has not always existed.
I would disagree with the part about law of causality.
Okay, so this is interesting. The law of causality actually stops infinite regress. So infinite regress doesn't exist in reality. Did you know that?
Well, yeah, I would agree with that. That kind of goes back to my natural theology days. I remember
Yeah.
specifically like Hilbert's Hotel and stuff like that. I know that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And this is actually something a lot of people didn't know, and I think it's crazy. The law of causality fixes so many problems in the world and like understanding how the world operates. But that's neither here or there. The law of causality states that every effect has a cause, and if there's an infinite step of cause, it turns into a contradiction.
Right. And we
So the
would say
law of
we
causality
solved
actually,
it by saying it stops at God. God is the first.
right, but God is when you're saying that you're talking transcendentally. You're not talking logically, right?
Well, I would say I'm talking like metalogically, not normative logic.
I don't know what the fuck metalogically means, bro.
Well, when you say like I'm not saying it logically, it's like, well, I am saying it logically, but I'm not saying in like the because again, this is where it gets a little bit, circular on the meta level. So I'm saying that.
Okay. Um, okay, but we have a contradiction, right? Because existence can't always exist because the law of causality says that infinity is not true. So
And
existence cannot always
we would say
exist.
the law
And
of
they're all co-equal axioms.
we would say the law of causality begins with God, because God is not caused.
Okay, so has this universe always existed?
Universe, as in like things extended in space, no.
So this universe has not always existed.
Within my clarification, yes, it's not always existed.
Okay, so what was before this universe?
There is no. Well, this gets into a question of time. I would say there was nothing before this universe. There's something with sans without the universe, but there's nothing before.
But nothing is non-existence.
Nothing is non-existence.
Yes.
Depends on the context, but uh, I I
Okay, so
I disagree that there's nothing sans the universe. Like extended into
huh?
space, sure. Like things extended into space, sure. There's nothing sans or without the universe, but there is something without the universe, and that is God.
Okay. I'm just confused, bro. I'm just so fucking confused. So the way I see this is, and actually, to be fair to you, existence doesn't necessarily mean our universe. Our universe is just the only thing that we can see. Existence could certainly be more than the universe, but again, like we can't know that because we can't see it. We can only deal with deductive
Right, and that
possibilities. And deductively speaking, this is beyond us, but deductively speaking, existence, causality, and the logical systems um, they're all intertwined. They're all co-equal. And the law of causality says that existence is not infinite because infinity does not exist. There was not an infinite beginning, right? If you point to God, it would have to be something not supported by the law of causality,
right, and
which would
that would be, and I understand the point you're making, but that would be disagreeing about the law of causality.
well, wait. What's the disagreement about the law of
The
causality?
disagreement is that I would say that infinity within the law of causality refers to normative things. So yeah, there is no infinite regresses within normative like aspects. But when you get to the core root of the worldview, we would say there's a starting point from where the law of causality begins its instantiation. So from there, the law of causality applies. But on the meta level, like causality, like infinity, and the problem with infinite regress begins and ends with God. So because of God, there's no infinite regress. And, like for example, in Kalam cosmological argument, I don't know if you ever heard of it. It's similar to the first mover
Is that
argument.
the cosmological argument?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so
They all take the same different names to mean the same thing.
yeah. So the cosmological argument, if you use the form of saying, well, not everything that exists has a cause, then now you're saying, well, God has a cause, and then you get to infinite regress. The way you stop it is by saying everything that begins to exist has a cause, God doesn't begin to exist. So it's a bit of a similar thing at play here with the law of causality.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying. Wait, is it epistemic? Epistemically speaking, that it prevents infinite regress. The problem is the law of causality refers to more than just epistemology. It refers to, I think, all domains of existence. I'm pretty sure it must because it's a co-equal with existence. So, for example, here's the argument. Premise one: every effect must have a cause.
Disagree. Well,
That's the axiom of that's the law of causality, bro.
well, it depends. If you say effect, I mean, I would say God is not an effect. So I guess it could apply to that, but I just want to make sure. God has no cause. So, assuming that premise falls in line with that, then sure.
God has no cause, but God is part of logic, and logic follows under its own rules. Like logic
No.
can't disobey its own rules,
No, so
right?
that would be a disagreement uh,
Huh?
on that part.
You wait, like logic can disagree with its own rules?
No, but what I'm saying is that you're trying to say that logic says that infinity is impossible, and I'm saying that that applies in normative context, but doesn't apply when you're talking about meta logic, which is what we're
It's not
talking about.
normal. It's metaphysical. It's metaethical,
No, we would disagree.
and fuck is the last epistemological.
No, only on the normative level, not on the meta level, because on the meta level, uh, logical contradiction, paradox, etc., becomes
Wait. So okay, let me get this right. You only accept the law of causality for epistemology?
I well, I accept it on all levels to a degree, but it's different when the point I'm making is that it's different. Logic works differently when you're talking about meta-logical things because, in a way, you're violating the laws of logic when you start talking about logic in the meta level. Because the meta level is asking, okay, what's logical? Then you're using logic to prove logic. So in a way, you're violating logic by even trying to justify logic. So that's the point I'm making. The meta level
No,
works
you
differently.
are. Wait, you're not violating logic
Yes,
by
because you're begging the
discussing
question.
logic.
You're begging the question when you do that.
No. Wait. You can't do something that's a contradiction.
It's not an explicit contradiction, but it's begging the question. When you say logic is logical because X, Y, and Z, you're using logic to prove logic. That's begging the question. You're assuming the
But you
truth of what's
can't
in question.
you can't do something that is illogical.
Right, and I would agree on the normative level. When you get to the meta level, it's a bit different. Like, I mean, you already said this earlier. There's a level of circularity. Circularity is not allowed in the normative logic. That's why in the meta level it's different.
Right, but we're past the circularity. Right now we're just so when we engage in discussion, we're past the circularity. We both implicitly agree
No,
with logic because we're talking.
no, okay,
Even you, yes, you.
that's
You're
not.
implicitly agreeing with logic.
No,
You're
no,
performing logic as you converse.
yeah,
So you
we're
can't deny logic when you're using it.
no, we're talking about a meta level thing right now. So within the context of this discussion at this very moment, like if we start talking about, I don't know, milk in the fridge, right? I wouldn't be able to say what I'm saying now. But on a meta level, it's different. We're talking about meta logic. We're using logic to try and explain logic. That's
Right, but the thing that prompted me to say you were wrong is that I think you said I forgot what you said exactly. But even if we're talking about logic, we can't disobey the laws of logic. We are confined within the laws of logic, and we cannot escape them.
I
It's
feel like
impossible.
I feel like a
We
part of
just
the laws.
can't.
I feel like a part of the laws of logic is that it's different on the meta level. Like things work differently. Like,
What do you mean by the meta
well,
level?
I keep
Like
meta.
talking about logic?
Yeah, we're talking about logic. Okay? For example, let me ask you something. Why is logic logical?
Bro, I don't fucking know.
well, what's your argument? If you don't know, then why are you trying to argue? You don't know what's logical, so why are you arguing using logic? You don't even know.
No, would you say why is logic logical? Is that what
Yeah,
you said?
yeah. Why?
I would have to take like a week to take that apart and understand it.
Okay, yeah. This is why we're talking past each other right now. It's because that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about meta level question. That's a meta level question because you're asking about the thing in question. It's
Okay, but
confusing.
my point is, if we're talking about logic, we are using logic as we talk about logic.
That's begging the question. You're violating a law of logic when you do that. That's the point.
What law are we violating?
You're assuming logic when you're asking whether or not logic is logical.
Well, okay. You're begging the question in the sense that everything we act out is begging the question. In the sense that I said, how did you bring this back to presuppositionalism? You fucking bro.
What happened?
Going theology, bro. Oh my god. Yes, in the way that everything we do is circular. Yes, that is true. But it's almost as if it's almost, you're going to bring us back to indispensability versus certainty if we do that.
Well, but that's the whole point of my argument. You can't justify any of your claims, and when you said that you don't know why logic is logical, that's kind of demonstrating the point I'm making. Because you're using logic to prove all these things, but you can't answer a meta-level question about logic. So, because the third order of imposition
neither can you.
Comes before. Yes, I can.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can. I can argue for the truth of logic.
Because it would be circular.
Well, the point is that in a worldview, you have to accept the level of circularity. You're denying circularity. I'm not. That's the point.
No. We're both implicitly accepting logic. We're both implicitly accepting circularity when we talk about logic.
Right, but you just said my argument's a problem because it's circular.
Because you said my problem was an argument because it was circular. So would I say that?
Because your system doesn't allow for it. That's the point. You said I think therefore I am first. That's a classical foundationalist system that doesn't allow for any level of circularity. That's the problem with your foundation.
It doesn't allow for circularity?
No, and it explicitly says that. That's why Aquinas made dumb arguments.
You take that back.
Well, I assume you're not a Catholic, so I don't think you care.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding, bro. I'm kidding. Okay, but no, my point is when we talk about logic, we're both implicitly accepting that we're going to move forward with the game. And if you say it's circular, then we're saying we don't accept the game anymore, and we have to step back to presuppositionalism and the circularity of logic.
Yeah, and the point is that's kind of one of the crux of the argument I'm making against you, because you're saying that, we can continue forward playing the game. And again, but this ontology versus epistemology distinction. I think that I believe in coherentism, where all these web of beliefs work together, and God is ultimately the foundation of that. So I'm willing to continue because I don't have the problem, I don't think. But under your system, you don't, I don't know, again, you haven't said, you're making like a first mover argument,
bro,
so I don't know if
coherentism is... Why? You're just like Jay Dyer, bro. Okay,
he makes a transcendental argument too. So Greg Bonson, Van Til, it's a school of thought.
Here's what I don't understand. You said God is the foundation of coherentism, but coherentism doesn't have a foundation.
The foundation is a coherent web of beliefs, and that coherent web of beliefs, ultimately, the way you define what is coherent web of beliefs is God. So God is like the web, if you will.
Okay, but we've been talking about a lot of stuff. But holy fuck, dude! Every cause must have a cause. Yes? No? Every effect must have a cause?
Well,
every effect must have a cause.
Is God an effect? Would that fall into it?
I'm asking you.
God is not an effect, so yeah, every
I guess
effect...
God falls under every, doesn't he? For you, God falls under every.
Huh?
I guess for you, God would technically fall under every, right?
Yes. In some way, yes.
Okay. So every effect must have a cause, and you would disagree with it.
Well, no, okay. Every effect
must have a cause.
Yeah, sure. I just don't want to say that God has a cause. That's what I'm trying to clarify. But like things that begin, like for example, if I drop a ball, it fell because I dropped it. I believe that.
Okay. A chain of causes without a beginning has no first cause.
Yeah, I guess as a just state of affairs, that would be true.
Yeah. if there is no first cause, then the entire chain has no first cause.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Uh, okay. Wait. If there's no first cause, then the entire chain has no explanation. But you would just say the explanation is God. No, but I would want a logical explanation. If there's no
Well,
first cause, then
well,
the
I
entire chain
believe
has
God
no
is the first
logical explanation.
mover. Ontologically, I agree
What?
with Aquinas' argument on that, but epistemically, I disagree with it.
Bro, I've been trying to fucking. I've been trying to argue that this entire time.
Well, the whole
You
point,
fucking
the reason why I think Aquinas' argument is dumb is because it presupposes a bunch of things that don't work. He has a classical foundationalist view, and under Humean skepticism, all these things are brought into question. For example, well, how do you know that how do you know that all the movers have to have a first cause? How do you know infinite regress is impossible? I know you have statements for that, but at the end of the day, it's going to get into epistemology and how you justify the foundation of your epistemology, which kind of makes it into a transcendental argument. But the problem is the Catholics and the Western people who made this argument don't have the foundation necessary to get into a transcendental argument because they have the criterion problem for the self-evident truths. So that's why I think the argument is dumb. It's not because I disagree with God being the first mover.
Okay. So I believe in the first mover because it's logically incoherent to not believe in it. Now, my belief of God would be that He is the first mover. Now, that would be an inductive assumption. But yeah, so basically the argument would be like, fucking, where the fuck did it go, dude? I've got something fucking. So you would disagree with logic is contingent. Now, I would say this is a problem on your part because logic is part of existence and part of causality and part of all the other co-equal axioms. And those are all contingent. And then I would say logic is contingent, God is necessary, or whatever, the first mover is necessary. Therefore, God cannot be logic or be bound by it. And that's how I view it. So
Well,
the way I view God is transcendent to logic. Now, honestly, bro, I just don't know why so many people don't like that argument. I don't understand.
but how do you? Okay, so there's like two. I guess the first question should be a quick one. Does logic vary from possible world to possible world?
No.
You said it's contingent, not necessary.
Yes.
Well, an element of contingency is it's possible it could be different.
I don't know if that's true.
Well, the whole point of
Right.
necessity is that it's the same in every world. It's necessary. It cannot be otherwise. If you say contingent, it's possible it could be otherwise.
I'm not using contingent in that sense. I'm using contingent in the sense that logic is part of existence, part of causality. And existence itself is contingent.
Existence is contingent?
Yes.
So it's a
Because-
possible world where there's no existence.
Because of causality, existence is contingent. Because existence is not infinite.
But when you say contingent, that means there's a possible world where it's not a thing.
Maybe that's just like a difference in definitions.
Well, that's just
Or a difference in
modality.
understanding definitions. What? What's this modality?
Modality asks like about contingency and necessity. Contingent things can be different in possible worlds. Necessary things are the same in every world. That's why we say God is good and not God commands good. Because what God commands can vary world to world. So that means there could be a variance in what's good and what's bad. We say God is good because God's
When I say
necessary.
dependent, I mean dependent on something.
Huh?
That's what I mean. When I say contingent, I mean the primary use of the definition. Contingent is depending on something. That's what I mean when I say it.
Okay, and depends on what?
It depends on a necessary being.
Okay. Now this gets into the second prong of the argument I'll make. So, how do you know this being?
How do I know the being?
Yeah, in any way.
The only thing we can know about the being is that they are necessary. That's the only thing you can know, deductively speaking.
Well, I mean, how do you know that?
because via the laws of logic, we can understand that because of causality, existence is contingent, and because of modalities, we can understand that
Yes.
something is necessary and something is contingent.
So, I I guess I'll just refer back to earlier. You said the justification for logic is either like an infinite regress or a brute fact. It was something like that. Is that true?
Well, like you said, there's no certainty behind logic.
Well,
It's indispensable moving
on your
forward.
view,
Yeah, in my view.
right? But I guess the point I'm trying to make is this is kind of the same criticism with Muslims. Muslims have a doctrine of total transcendence, meaning that no created thing in the created order could ever possibly be analogous to God. But the problem is, how do you know what God is at all, right? Like, how do you know Islam is true? Because you know Islam's true based on words on paper, for example. But words on paper are created, but it can't refer to God. So that's the problem there. It's like a contradiction. So what I'm saying to you right now is I'm kind of bringing up the same criticism. You're saying you know this being is necessary. That's knowing the being in some way. I'm asking, unless you
Mm-hmm.
believe in like pantheism, where like the being is like intertwined with creation fully, how do you know this being at all? Because we would say we have divine revelation, so we can know God, and we have analogy, right? And when you have this kind of deistic position, you don't have that. So
Wait, I
that's
thought you hated divine revelation, divine command theory. Oh, those are different. Anyway, so so the only thing we can know what God is because we can know what He isn't, right? Because the laws of logic tell us what is, and so because we know that existence is contingent, we know that God is the opposite of that.
yeah.
So it's
So
process of elimination.
well, and the problem is that you're saying we know, but you don't know if you know, so you don't really know.
Yeah, but at this point, everything I say, you basically just take an asterisk and put indispensable there. That's what I mean when I'm talking and speaking.
Yeah, but the criticism I just brought in also applies to it being indispensable. And also,
Wait,
like,
what?
well, yeah, because you said you did being indispensable. I asked, how do you know that? And you kind of went back to like the like infinite regress type thing.
Indispensability. Yeah, yeah. So logically speaking, we know.
Yeah, but then that assumes logic, which is what I asked about.
Bro, we just went in a
I,
fucking circle, bro. You said that you would accept my asterisk. Where's my asterisk?
well, what? Well, I don't accept your asterisk. I understand that you're saying that, but I'm not accepting it as like, okay, well, okay, that's true, because that kind of undercuts the whole point of the whole point of the argument is you're saying all these things without grounding, which brings
Okay,
into
okay,
question
wait,
whether
wait.
or not it's true.
Oh, I probably went about this the wrong way. Do an internal critique. In my worldview, am I correct?
Say it again.
If logic is indispensable, am I correct?
No. So
Okay,
I feel like this is
where's
an
the
important
contradiction?
point we're gonna have to make here. So again, ontology versus epistemology. I don't disagree. Like obviously, I think you can do logical argument and be right about it. You could be right about it ontologically, but epistemically, I have no justification. What we're talking about, at least what I'm talking about, is worldviews. My worldview is the Christian worldview. Your worldview is this one with this first mover and all these different things you talked about. And what I'm saying is your worldview is logically incoherent. That's what I'm saying. So I'm taking everything into account, not just little bits and bobs of statements you can say that are true.
So, wait, are you saying it's logically impossible to do an internal critique? My worldview?
Yes, because you can't ground logic. Exactly.
Wow, that's crazy.
Oh. Because to do an internal critique, you're assuming things should. That's actually ethics. To do an internal critique, you're assuming it should be logical. It should be a certain way. Well, first of all, you
Wait,
said
why would you assume it should? Wouldn't you just assume it could?
yeah, but that kind of defeats the whole purpose of an internal critique. If I'm critiquing your worldview right now, I'm doing internal critiques because I'm assuming it should follow the laws of logic. Should. That's a moral claim. You said you don't believe in morality, but you're doing internal critiques which assume my worldview should be a certain way. It should be coherent. But you don't accept moral realism, so why? And you also have epistemology. So how are you going to justify the logic you're using to do your internal critique?
Well, okay. Well, the problem is, and this is the big problem. This is probably why we keep getting stuck back into speaking about the first axioms, is because the way you view logic is different than me. And actually, it's funny because technically we can't move our forward discussion. So we can't talk about moral realism or cognitivism or anything like that because we haven't even like set the ground rules. We can't agree on the ground rules. So our conversation is perpetually stuck behind the first axiom.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And
whether logic is indispensable or certain. Yeah.
And I would say that my worldview solves the problem we're having. Yours doesn't. Yours is the reason why we have a problem in the first place.
No, so the problem is, so okay, so let's go back to the first axiom because I fucking hate myself. All right, back to the first argument. You said that everything is circularity without a transcendental justification. Okay.
No.
That's what you said.
I didn't say everything is circular unless. I said that everything is circular, and the only way to have a coherent and circular, I don't mean like literally logic is true because logic is true. I just mean there's like a question begging aspect to it, just to be clear. So there's a level of circularity, not that it is circular. And as far as like how God plays into that, I would say that that's just a fact of everyone's worldview. Right? That's what I'm saying that as. And I'm saying God is only coherent foundation for any worldview.
Wait, would you say logic is completely certain?
Yes.
Oh, wait. Okay, so moving forward, if we agree, if I do an internal critique, and then we say logic is completely certain, that means that the laws of logic are completely true. Right?
I would say that, yeah.
Okay. Why didn't I just do this in the first place?
Well,
okay, so
I think you're gonna say like, okay, we're gonna grant that and move forward. Is that what you're trying to say?
What if I did say that?
Well, if I did say that, then I mean, I have no problem discussing like problems and like explicating my position, but as far as I understand the debate, it's a worldview versus a worldview. So if I grant this this unfounded assumption, I'm kind of conceding the whole point of my argument. And at that point, it would kind of be like sophistry in some sense, in that it's not really.
Wait, why would you be? Why would you be conceding your argument if we're exploring your worldview?
Because you don't have the grounding to question it epistemically.
Well, that's what an internal critique is. I'm using your justification.
Yeah, but internal critiques assume logic.
You assume logic. You assume logic is true.
To do your internal critique, you need to assume logic. And you're also assuming existence, You're assuming knowledge, all these different things. Because you're using words. Internal critique, those are two words. That assumes logic, that assumes knowledge, it assumes basically everything like I've been saying, because everything's intertwined. And I would say that you can't do that. You don't have the grounding necessary to even begin.
Damn. That's deep, bro.
Yeah, it's a meta-level argument. It's not like, because other arguments like cosmological, teleological, etc., they're normative level arguments. They're kind of stupid. I don't really like them.
Okay, wait, but if this is true, then technically we can't talk, right?
Well, I would say we only if you. What I would say, this may not be as charitable by saying we, but I would say that you don't have, like, we're playing poker and you have no cards. So why would I play poker with you? You don't have any cards at all.
No, I get it. I understand. I understand now. I can't talk to you.
Because you don't have the playing cards, yeah.
That's so fucking funny, bro. What a Giga Chad move. You're like, What the fuck?
Yeah, that's why I don't like
That's
Aquinas,
so
because
fucking
Aquinas
hilarious,
assumes that the
bro.
atheist has the cards. And I'm saying that the atheist doesn't have the cards, and it's true, I would say.
Fuck.
Or the deist, or whatever.
Okay. What the fuck? That's hilarious. Okay. Okay. That's really funny, dude. Okay. Um, I can't talk to you. Yeah. That's right. Correct. That's correct.
Yeah, like logically speaking, like logical arguments, you can't even get off the ground. Yeah, you're like a I'm like a plane in the sky, and you're like a plane on
Wait,
without any
wait, wait,
feet.
wait. Logically speaking, can I speak to you?
Can you what?
Logically speaking, can I speak to you?
I would say more accurately, philosophically, you can't. Which is what I'm demonstrating in my
Then,
arguments.
no, but doesn't that mean I'm performing a contradiction?
Yeah,
Because I'm
we
speaking to you
would say
right
that
now.
your worldview is inherently contradictory, and that's the reductio part of the argument. It's not
Wait. Doesn't that make you fall into a contradiction?
make me what?
Because by the act of me speaking to you, from your worldview, the act of me speaking to you is a contradiction, right? But
Well,
contradictions don't exist.
I wouldn't
So that'd
say
be a
that.
contradiction in your worldview.
Okay, well, I feel like you're kind of context shifting the words. I would say that can't speak to me is meaning like your worldview doesn't support the assumptions you're making. That's what it means. Like you can't even start your critique without committing some sort of fallacy. That's what we're saying. That's what we mean by can't speak to you. I don't mean like I literally can't use words to communicate with you.
Oh, okay. But I can't argue with you.
Not coherently, not logically. You have
What
to
do you mean?
make,
What do you mean coherently? Can
well,
I or can I not argue?
not committing a fallacy? No. Your very act of trying to argue with me is committing fallacies because of the assumptions you make that are logically incoherent.
Okay, so if I were to, no, I don't even know what to say. If I were to say you're wrong, I would be committing a fallacy.
Well, I mean, that in of itself is kind of a fallacy, but I mean, if you mean it as in, like, you can't say I'm wrong because you can't ground
And
what
I
is
don't
wrong.
know.
You don't know.
Yeah,
No. So,
that's crazy. That's crazy, bro. Um. Okay. No, that's cool. That's cool. I mean, well, do you want to end the discussion there then?
well, would you say you have anything prudent to speak of, I suppose? Because if not, then I'm fine with leaving it there.
Wait, not coherently.
What do you mean?
See what I did there?
Well,
Not
not
coherently.
coherently, sure. But I guess the point of this discussion is beyond because I like you do YouTube, I do YouTube, so obviously there's an aspect of getting content. I'm sure you understand that.
Okay,
But
okay.
yeah,
Okay. No, that's cool. I mean, dude, that was a crazy discussion. Um, Man, presuppositionalism is weird, dude.
yeah, it's very because the classical apologetic of Christians for a long time has been the classical method of using like Aquinas's arguments or William Lane Craig arguments, etc. But I feel like they kind of are unsophisticated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fair. Um, I know I can't argue with you, but do you think value can exist without a valuer? Actually, first, do you think value exists?
Yes.
Okay, can value exist without a valuer?
Depends. Do you mean value in the same exact way, or using value in a different way on the second one?
I'm saying value as in value is something that somebody values.
Yeah, I would say that, like, on a personal level, I feel like there's kind of like an infinite in terms of value. I value this because I value. Uh, in terms of God, I would say that value, God is value. That's how you ground value. So I'd say at that point, the infinite regress stops, but from there, it's just like it keeps going on and on.
Wait. Would you say God is value?
Yeah, in that you ground value in Him. Yeah.
Oh, bro, we're gonna do a Jordan Peterson, bro. We're gonna do a Jordan Peterson. Did you see that debate?
Yeah. Uh, Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, you did.
He's not a We wouldn't
He's
consider him
not
a
a.
Christian, quote unquote.
Oh, yeah. You better not put any words in his mouth.
Yeah, no, he's a Gnostic. We don't accept his theology.
Okay, okay. Um, I don't know. I was just curious if you think value could exist without a valuer, but if God is value, then technically, yeah, value could exist without a valuer, right?
Yeah, in that it stops at a certain point. Yeah.
Well, in that God could exist without humans, and there would be nobody to value him unless he values himself. Would you say God values himself?
Yeah.
Wait, does that prove the axiom then? Value cannot exist without a valuer?
Uh, yeah, but it gets a bit equivocal when you're talking about value. Because, like, let's say, like,
When you
God
say
is the.
equivocal, you don't mean circular, do you?
No, no, no. I mean, equivocal as in it gets a bit unclear what the word means. Because at a certain point, it gets a bit confusing. Because if you say, like, I value potatoes because I value environment, like, it keeps going, like, in that sense. But at a certain point, when you get to God, like, there can't be anything before God or outside of God. Because God is the very beginning. So it's it kind of just keeps going, and then it stops there. It's like logical reasoning. Logic goes justification, then it stops at God.
Okay, okay. It stops at God.
Yeah, in that there's no more
But God
like
is.
God values God because God values some, or God values God because value something else.
But when you say it stops at God, you just mean it keeps on going, right?
What do you mean it keeps on going?
Well, like something doesn't stop because God
Well, yeah, I wouldn't
God
say
doesn't
like
have a.
stomps. I would just mean as in there's nothing outside of that. Like before that, there's nothing prior.
Okay, okay, interesting. I don't know. I mean, that's an entirely interesting view to have, that God is part of the world. Um, would you say that? No, you would. Yeah, I mean, like, you agree that all the axioms are co-equal, like existence exists,
Yeah.
logic exists, causality exists, and you would say that God's energy is all of those things.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that's interesting. I think there's. I know you disagree. I think I can poke holes into that, but I know you probably think I could.
Well, I mean, people have been trying for a long time. That's for sure.
Damn, bro, shut me down like that.
But I
Um,
think it was a good discussion. I would say, no, not too long ago, I debated someone. He was this guy, and he was saying that, well, okay, I'm gonna grant that my worldview is shattered, okay, and now I'm gonna criticize the Bible. It's like, okay, well, if you accept my argument, which he did, then Christianity is true. So you can't use the Bible to prove it's not true. It's just retarded. But yeah, I would say that
I
I
mean,
could tell you've
it
done
depends.
research.
I mean, since I can't argue with you because that's logically impossible, I can't disprove you, which sucks. But I think if I could argue with you, I think I could poke holes in your. I
Well,
bet I could, but I can't. I can't argue with you because it's
well,
logically impossible.
yeah, I mean, well, that's that's a big thing to grant. Like, if I had logic, I can't have logic, but if I did, I mean, that's a big thing to grant. But you can still like ask questions about the worldview, and I'm willing to answer it. Like, how do I answer certain like seeming contradictions or whatnot, and how do I answer to other worldviews?
Hmm.
Like, I'm of course willing to speak of that, but when we talk about like worldview versus worldview, that's my argument.
Okay. Okay. That's good. I don't know. I wonder if I could do some research on this and figure out a way to do something. I don't know. I don't
Well,
know.
well,
Um,
if you want some help, I've done a lot of research. I haven't seen anything good. Uh, for example, Alex Malpass. I don't know if you heard of him. He's like this. He's like a PhD philosopher and whatever. His argument against presuppositionalism is toast. saying that we say that he gets the syllogism wrong for argument. He says that God or not God, God is logic, God grounds everything, therefore God. And then he says toast or no toast. Toast grounds everything, so therefore toast. It's not even accurate to our position because we don't. Yeah, exactly. That's literally what he says.
I was gonna get the TAG right. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, exactly. But Malpass is like the best atheists have, and I understand you're not necessarily an atheist, but we would engage with you the same way we do with an atheist because we would about the divine revelation part.
Hmm. Oh, I'm not gonna forget you referenced Matt Dillahunty saying I was like him. Like
well,
that
I mean, you use the same art. You use the same point. You use the same point.
He did not. He does not use the same argument.
He made the same point about, well, we don't have to justify it. That's what he said when presented with this argument.
Okay, but I think you were criticizing me back then when I said I couldn't justify odds. Were you just saying he couldn't justify morality?
They were talking about logic, and he said, I can't. You don't have to justify logic. There's no justification that you have to justify it. That's what he said.
Oh, okay. Well, I think I truly don't think he hit the level I did. Like, I don't think he knows about. I'm not going to get into it, but I don't think his argument is the same as indispensability. I just think he doesn't. I think he's like a dumb skeptic or something like that.
Well, I would agree with that. I would agree.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it's
but yeah, dude, I liked your video. I liked your breakdown. It was good stuff, good content. You're a smart dude. You're pretty cool.
Thank you.
What's your name? Do you go by your YouTube channel name?
Just Hyosha. It's Brazilian.
What is it?
Hyosha.
I don't even know if I can say that right.
Klez. You call me Klez. It's not the name of the
Klez? Okay,
yeah.
I'll call you Klez. Yeah, it was good to meet you, Klez. You're a cool guy. Bro, if you ever get to debate Dean, I'd like to see that.
I would love to debate Dean. I would love it. But yeah.
I think.
Go ahead.
He's just so like the TikTok debaters. Their minds move so fast.
Yeah. Yeah. So whenever Dean gets on his assumptions, he just runs off to something else. That's one of the problems. That's why his arguments, like he makes a dumb argument about like, well, God is a subject, so your morality is subjective. It's like that's the most obvious like equivocation category error, but because it's so fast paced, he gets away with it. So I feel like that's kind of what they bank on. Same thing with Parker.
Yeah. They kind of also just like throw out things like you said, they do like red herrings and they kind of just like whatever goalposts. They just steamrolling whatever the fuck. They just kind of move on to topics and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, I'll definitely talk to you again if I have something else, or if like I crack the code or something. I'll talk to you again.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, it was definitely cool meeting you, talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't wait to see your future debates.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I have a channel here called Silu. I make posts on there every day. It's not just about logic and philosophy. I talk about politics and women and all working out, all this different stuff. It's a very wide basket, but I'm sure if you look through there, you'll see kind of some of my criticism about different things. That's if you're interested. I post there pretty consistently.
Oh, dude, maybe. What do you think of it? We could probably debate red pill someday.
Okay, do you take a red pill or blue pill position or something else?
Red pill position.
Okay, I mean, I would mostly agree, but it would actually get into morality.
We might not disagree. Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree with most red pill things, but red pill is very equivocal. So like, it could be Myron Gaines' red pill or someone else's red pill. But like, my main thing about red pill is it's kind of useless because I'd say Christianity has all the things you need in order to do well. Because like all the red pill philosophies that I agree with, for example, not being a cuck, you can find that in Christianity. But the things I would disagree with are like, for example, Myron. I'm not saying you like red pill is just Myron, but for an example, Myron says he has to sleep with 30 women before you get a wife. We would say that's immoral. And that's a bad thing to do. So that would kind of be my angle for approaching a red pill debate. So it'd be about morality.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah.
We also couldn't, because I heard you say this before. I was watching the video and you said the thing that Nicky Boy was missing was that he wasn't grounding the Christian nationalism in Christian ethics, and that was his problem.
Exactly.
And that would be a major schism for me and you, because I ground all my argumentation in consequentialism, which you would reject.
Inconsequentialism. Is that like similar to utilitarianism? Is that how you mean that?
Yes.
Right. I think that utilitarianism plays a part in like political things, but it's not everything.
So you would make. Wait, does? No, because you would make all your arguments deontologically. You would make all your arguments from God.
Yeah.
You don't care about consequences.
In terms of applied ethics, because there's like 3 tiers. On applied ethics, I believe there's an element of utilitarianism. For instance, in the Bible, there's like a Jewish command. And I'm talking about like Jesus talking about the Good Samaritan. There's a command not to touch like a dead body, right? Something like that. And the story of the Good Samaritan Jesus was talking about was there was this man who had basically been damn near killed, and this Levite, like a priest, like supposedly a high-ranking guy, he walked by because he didn't want to violate that law. But then a Samaritan, who the people that Jesus was talking to hated, helped the man. And the point is that that's the difference between that's a time where applied ethics would be utilitarian. Like it's just better for human flourishing. That's where it differs from normative and meta-ethics for us.
Okay, so you would say the utilitarian is like the cherry on top of the Christian ethic.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate. We can't debate that because all my arguments are consequential. But listen, I'll say a few things. I would even grant, and I'm an anarchist, so I don't believe in Christian nationalism. But I will grant you that Christian nationalism is far from the worst governmental system. I'll grant you that, okay? I'd say it's up there with the good ones, the less bad ones. Okay, I'll grant you that one. If we had to have a government, the Christian nationalist government would not be close to the worst. It'd be on the better side of ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, because leftists suck. We can agree with that, right?
Yeah, we do.
Fucking leftists, bro. The bitch. Okay.
Exactly.
Great, bro. All right. Well, I'll let you go. You probably need to go to bed so you can hit the gym tomorrow or something macho and masculine.
Yeah.
But that was a good conversation. Really enjoyed talking with you, and I'll message you again if I figure out something else we can talk about.
All right. Sounds good. Nice meeting you.
All right. Nice meeting you too. See ya.
See you.